Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining this evening. We're just going to wait a couple of moments to get a few more callers on, but stand by and we'll be right with you. So I just remember to all of you out there that would like to ask a question tonight, please press 0 and give your question, and I look forward to chatting with you in all just a bit. Thank you. Hi, good evening, everyone. This is John Cahill. I am a candidate for New York State Attorney General in the election coming up just a little bit less than 3 weeks from today. I really want to thank you all for joining me this evening to have a conversation on issues that are important to the folks out on Long Island. Before I start off with a brief introduction of my background, and I know I've had the opportunity to speak to many of you before a few weeks ago on different issues, but I'm out here on Long Island for events this evening, and I have with me a good friend of mine, Grant Lally, who's running for Congress, and I'd like to have him to say just a few words of introduction and hello, and then we'll get started. Grant?
Hey, John. It's great to have you here out on Long Island, and I think things are going very well in the campaign, but I just wanted to say one thing, and I know you care about it and I care about it, and that's how important it is for women to have opportunities and how we fight for women to have equal rights and opportunity in our society. And I just wanted to relate, in my background, my mom serves as a Supreme Court judge, and when she came here to this country as a young girl, as a refugee, after World War II in Europe, and worked her way through school, learned English. She's now a Supreme Court judge. And also one other announcement. My wife and I are expecting our first child.
That's great, Grant. Congratulations.
So on top of the campaign, we have
a lot of things going on. That's all good.
Anyway, John, it's great to have you here.
Grant. Thanks
great
for
to have
being
you on
here.
Long Island here.
Thanks. Thank you all, and thank you, Grant. A great guy. So just a little background of myself. I was worked in the Pataki administration for 12 years as DEC commissioner, and then I served the last 5 years as Governor Pataki as the Secretary Chief of Staff, where my primary responsibility was overseeing the recovery efforts and redevelopment issues around Ground Zero. Since that time, I've been practicing law. I have a consulting business with the former governor. I am blessed to have a wonderful wife, Kim, of almost 28 years this week, actually, and four children. I reside in Yonkers, New York, and I'm running for Attorney General to bring independence and integrity to that office, which I believe has been sorely lacking. But the real purpose of this call tonight is to hear from all you and hear your questions and concerns. So we look forward to having you dial in. Remember, if you have a question, press 0, and you'll get through and join the conversation this evening. Just a little bit about what was going on today with respect to the campaign, in that we announced an aggressive plan to combat the heroin epidemic around the state. As I have traveled throughout this great state, every community has felt the ravages of the heroin epidemic, and we need to have an Attorney General who's serious about law enforcement, and it is also serious about treatment and prevention. And the plan that I introduced today basically is a comprehensive plan to help the state and help the communities to deal with the heroin epidemic. The first thing that I would propose was to reverse the damage that was caused by a piece of legislation that the current Attorney General championed through the New York State Legislature when he was a state senator. It was commonly referred to, and still is, as the Drug Dealer Protection Act. Now, I am very proud to have worked in the Pataki administration and worked to reform the Rockefeller drug laws, which many of you recall had mandatory sentences for those in simple possession. And we need to treat those who are addicts, and jail is not usually the best course of action for those that are suffering from substance abuse. But we need to take a much different approach for those that are actually selling drugs in our community, that are putting the lives of our children and our loved ones at risk. And unfortunately, that's what the Drug Protection Act of 2009 did. It gave essentially drug dealers a get-out-of-jail pass even with the sale of narcotics and heroin. That needs to be looked at. We need to make changes of those to that piece of legislation to make sure that those that are threatening our community by selling drugs are held accountable and put in jail. I also call for the introduction of a New York Len Bias law. Now, Len Bias was a great basketball player in the University of Maryland in the 1980s, died of a drug overdose, and as a result of that, the federal government passed legislation that imposes strict liability on anybody in the chain of sale of drugs, and it has an enormous impact on letting the federal authorities go after kingpins. We need to have such a legislation here in New York so that we can get to those that are selling drugs, particularly the kingpins, in order to cut down the supply of this heroin throughout the state. We'll talk a little bit more about the plan, but let me get Liz on the phone from Great Neck. Liz, are you with me?
Oh, hi. Thank you so much for having this conference call. It's really a great idea, and I really appreciate your being a strong enforcer of the law. I think that's terrific. My question is about some of the religion-based anti-Semitic attacks that have been going on. A couple was attacked on the Upper East Side. I mean, a lot of the kids, pro-Israel and Jewish kids, have been attacked on campuses, college campuses, punched in the face, knocked to the ground. Kids have ended up in the hospital with concussions. This is a really scary situation. We don't want to end up with like France, where people are just going into synagogues and trying to shoot people, or Jewish schools, and or like in Kansas City, where they shot Christians because they happened to be near a Jewish center. This is and I wanted to speak to you about to find out what your plans are in this area, and in terms of really enforcing the stop to these hate crimes.
Great question, Liz, and thank you for calling. And certainly the protection of our rights, or all of our constitutional rights, including our right to practice our religion, is something that the Attorney General should take with the most seriousness. And frankly, he has not. You mentioned the attacks on the Upper West Side, and obviously deplorable, but it's not the only ones. We have instances in upstate New York where we've had the same instances of attacks on people based on their faith. And we've had an Attorney General who, frankly, has been slow to act, if not at all. We need an Attorney General who understands that people practicing their faith is one of the fundamental principles of this country, and that it can be a zero tolerance. He has been, frankly, asleep at the switch and not using his authority, both in Manhattan as well as in upstate New York, where you've had numerous instances that have plagued the school district in upstate New York on violence towards children just simply based upon their faith. We need to take those crimes seriously. They not only have this enormous impact on particularly children that are the subject of those crimes, but they undermine our foundation in democracy. So as the next Attorney General, I will be a very strong advocate of freedom of religion and make sure that those that imperil it are put to justice. Thank you for the call, Liz. I have John on the phone from Hempstead. John? John?
John on the phone. John on the phone from Baldwin.
Oh, Baldwin. I'm sorry, John.
That.
Well, I'm John. The other John here is from Yonkers, so good to have you, John. Thank you for calling.
Okay. I'm concerned with the governor's imposition of the SAFE Act on the shooters of New York State. This is a firearms law which it was passed primarily because of the massacre up in Connecticut. Governor Cuomo passed a law which in many ways resembles the Obamacare law. It was passed with little discussion, and many of its provisions are extremely harmful to legitimate shooters in New York State, including the provisions where we're not able to effectively buy ammunition out of state, which we normally have when we buy large shipments. A lot of times we buy a case of ammunition.
Yeah, John. Thank you for let me. Yeah, I hear you, and let me tell you about my thoughts on the so-called SAFE Act, because you hit the nail on the head. This legislation was passed basically in the middle of the night after the nation, and in particular Newton, Connecticut, suffered this horrible, horrible tragedy. And instead of having a discussion with respect to violence on our schools and gun violence, the people in Albany rushed through a piece of legislation over what's called a bill of necessity. And what that means is that there wasn't really any debate allowed on the bill, that it was passed without the 3-day time passage requirement. And that's because they didn't want to hear from the people of New York in order to make this bill a bill that really would address the underlying issues of gun violence and violence in our schools. Instead, we had a piece of legislation that not only was horrible the way that it was passed, but as you mentioned, had and continues to have numerous faults in it. For instance, it makes restricts the magazine clip to 7 bullets. Well, law enforcement agents normally carry 10. And therefore, this legislation made every law enforcement officer in the state of New York, almost every law enforcement officer, committing a crime. And instead of having an attorney general that would stand up and point out these deficiencies, we had an attorney general who went along, came out at the last minute calling for the passage of the act without closely looking at with law enforcement officials and law-abiding citizens with respect to the impact of this legislation. And unfortunately, we never even addressed the real underlying issue of a mental health crisis that we're having in our country, particularly as it affects young people. We need to have a real serious discussion in this country and in the state about what we are doing on mental health, what services are we providing, what rights are we providing to parents to deal with this issue of mental health. Those are the type of discussions we should have had, but instead we just had a political solution crammed down the throats of New Yorkers, which I think was a disservice to the people of the state of New York. Remember, if you have a question, please press 0. And in the meantime, let me throw out a question to all of you. If the election were held today, who would you vote for? Press 1 for John Cahill, press 2 for Eric Schneiderman, and press 3 if you're still undecided. So again, if the election were held today, for whom would you vote? Please press 1 for John Cahill, 2 for Eric Schneiderman, and 3 if you're still undecided. I'd like to take a call from Teresa in Massapequa. Teresa, are you there? Hi, Teresa.
Yes, Mr. Cahill. Hi, how are you?
Thank you. I'm great, thank you. Thank you for calling in.
Oh, you're very welcome. I was just curious about your stand on legalization of marijuana.
So I am opposed to the legalization of marijuana. I have supported and continue to support regulated medicinal use of marijuana, particularly for so many children that are suffering from ailments that would really benefit and proven to benefit from medicinal marijuana. However, I do not support legalization of marijuana. I do believe that it is a gateway drug. You know, we started off this conversation tonight talking about the heroin epidemic. The idea of further legalizing drugs to make them more accessible to our children and to communities, I am strongly opposed to. So I do not favor the legalization of marijuana, other than for medicinal purposes, which the legislature did, in fact, pass legislation for that limited purpose this past June. Thank you for calling, Teresa. Femina from Oyster Bay, are you on the line? Jamina, are you there?
Yeah, I'm still here. I'm just listening to everybody, and I think it's good.
Okay, well, it's great to have you on and joining us. Thank you.
I tell you something, marijuana is also good, and I got to be honest, from people who are getting chemo.
Yes, it is.
My friend has MS, and she's young. She's only 50.
No, that's absolutely right. It does have some medicinal value, but we have to watch the overall legalization of marijuana, which I would be very much.
No, I don't want legalization. No.
Right. I hear you, but for medicinal purposes,
it's going to help.
So I know you have concerns about corruption in Albany, as do I, and I think for our listeners on the phone. What are your thoughts on that? Do you have a question?
Corruption in Albany?
Yeah. Well, you know, with respect to that, and thank you again for calling in and joining the conversation, Juliana.
Okay.
You know, listen,
no problem.
had an attorney general, who, in my opinion, who has been asleep at the switch at the
no.
corruption in Albany. The Moreland Commission, which I think many people down here on Long Island have followed, was a real opportunity for the attorney general to stand up and do what's right and hold people accountable in Albany. But instead, he let the outside interests, including the governor, run roughshod over the Moreland Commission and never stood up once for the independence and for the integrity of the office and the investigators. I think it's deplorable. The one opportunity we've had in recent time to really make a dramatic change in the culture of Albany, and the Eric Schneiderman was a no-show. I think people are going to see that. They're going to hold him to account. I've been talking about that issue for the campaign, and I will continue to do so. So thank you, Romina, for calling in. Remember, if you have a question, please press 0. And thank you all for joining us this evening. We have George from Freeport on the phone. George, thanks for calling.
Hello, sir, and I want to let you know I'm going to vote for you because I like what you're saying, and I'm very happy to participate in this telephone conference. My one real peeve is I live on the water in Freeport, and I put an application in on time, which April the 11th was the deadline, and I tried to get through to this New York Rising, and they said they just dismissed my thing because they didn't hear from me. I never heard from them, and I called up and I registered and I did it by computer. I first did it by computer. I wasn't sure whether I got through, so I called up and I have a number and all, and they said I have no claim. I mean, these people are idiots, and I'm not the only one that's had problems with this organization that the governor set up, and they should investigate it. They should investigate it whether you win the election or you lose the election. You should investigate it.
Well, George, thank you for calling in. I can tell you that. That is an issue that I hear constantly, not only on Long Island, but I was out in Staten Island earlier today about the lack of response from the state government with respect to the Hurricane Sandy. We need to have a government that's responsible. It's almost 2 years now since the tragic events of that hurricane or that superstorm, and people are still suffering. People still have not seen the benefits, whether it's from the government or from the insurance carriers. And someone needs to hold both of them accountable for the fact that it's 2 years now and people are still suffering and waiting for their checks so they can move on in their lives. So I will make sure that is a priority in the Attorney General's office. You know, the Attorney General's office is supposed to be protecting landowners and consumers. Again, Eric Schneiderman has failed. I will make that a priority in the next administration of the Attorney General's office. Thank you. We have Craig from Garden City. Craig, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for taking the call. I'd like you to comment on the benefits or the challenges of having a attorney general from one party in a government dominated by a governor from a different party.
Oh, I think the idea of checks and balances in government is important, whether it's on a local level, a state level, on a federal level. And the fact of the matter is that New York has broken with tradition over the last 8 years and has had one party in control of all statewide offices. That had not been historically the case. If you look back, whether it's in Governor Pataki's administration, Mario Cuomo's administration, Governor Rockefeller's, Governor Carey, there is always bipartisan government. That makes for effective government because there's checks and balances. We don't have that now in Albany. And does it create tension at times? I think maybe it does, but that's appropriate because there needs to be a check on one power being in control of virtually all levels of government. And I think that's an important message. I think you raise a very important issue facing the state, that a balance of power in Albany amongst the political parties is the most effective way, particularly on the corruption side, to ensure that the people's interests are being best served.
Yes, thank you for that answer, and I just would like to underscore your point about tension. I think the tension, should it exist, is a healthy tension and one we could benefit from in this state. I
totally agree. We can't have all go-along, get-along politics, and that's what we've had with Eric Schneiderman for the last 4 years, whether it's the Moreland Commission, whether it's going along with Shelley Silver with respect to trying to buy the silence of women who are sexually harassed in the workplace. We need somebody who's going to stand up with the people that elected them, not the politicians in Albany. So thank you, Craig. We have Nancy from Mastic Beach on the phone. Nancy, thank you for calling. Your questions for us?
Hello. Yes, hi. I wanted to see your views on the Common Core. I have a daughter, 28 years old, is in debt that I can't even tell you, has 2 master's degrees, and cannot get a teaching job.
the Common Core has been an utter failure in its implementation, and I do support higher standards. I do support testing both for our teachers and for our students, but the way the Common Core has been rolled out and implemented is nothing but a failure. And when you have
honor roll students are failing these tests.
I mean, I have heard horror stories after horror stories about whether it's in the affluent areas and higher performing school districts or lower performing school districts. They all face the same challenge, in that no one was prepared for this Common Core. They never reach out to the teachers and administrators in the implementation, and you have what you foresee as a result. You have a nightmare in the hands of teachers and parents, and real anxiety amongst these young students as they are trying to adapt to learn to a different methodology. I am on the Stop Common Core line. I think we need to go back and go back to what we were doing. New York State was developing its own testing, its own standards. New York can be a pretty effective state in developing curriculum. If we're left on our own, we don't need to be led by other states in a national movement. New York State should be taking the lead in developing standards and testings that are appropriate for New Yorkers, not being imposed by those in Washington. So I look forward to working with others and making sure that an appropriate set of new standards and testing are implemented in Albany. So Joanne from East Northport. Joanne, thank you for joining us. Joanne?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
Thank you, Joanne. Thanks for calling in.
Okay. You were just talking about Common Core in the school, so that was kind of part of my question or thought that I wanted to hear your thoughts on. But I guess in terms of, I'm going to say the standardization of teaching in general, how, I don't know how to put this politically correct, so I'm just not going to. There are smart kids and there are not so smart kids, and they're all lumped in class together, and my daughter comes home saying she's bored because they keep having to go over things because other kids aren't getting it. And she's only in first grade. And, and I know everybody learns at different rates, but the idea that now everybody has to be treated the same way in the same class and taught the same things at the same time, I feel like it's doing, certain kids a disservice.
Yeah, I think, thank you for calling in, Joanne. And having raised 4 children myself, now 2 of them are out of college, 2 of them in college, I certainly understand the point that you're coming from, and that we want all of our children to feel like they're challenged and excited to learn in the classroom. And when we're dumbing down the program, or they're not in and the same measure, if a child is not up to a particular learning level, to feel the anxiety of not being able to keep up can be certainly obviously detrimental not only to that child's educational opportunities but to their self-esteem. And I think that developing curriculum and developing testing around those issues to make sure that children of same ages get taught up to their ability and that they get pushed. I taught for a year before going to law school, graduating from college, and it was a wonderful experience. And I saw that firsthand, and it's a real challenge for a teacher when you have 30 or so individuals in a classroom and trying to make sure that all of them are learning. Some good teachers are able to do that. Others really struggle with it. So we do need to be sensitive to the issue of individuals' classroom, and the standardized testing from the Common Core, I think, has basically resulted in what you said is coming up with a cookie-cutter approach to education, which doesn't serve the interests of any of our children. So if I could ask you just a question to join in on in tonight. The question is, if the election were held today, for whom would you vote? Press 1 for John Cahill, press 2 for Eric Schneiderman, and press 3 if you're still undecided. So that's if the election was held today, for whom would you vote? 1 for John Cahill, press 2 for Eric Schneiderman, and press 3 if you're undecided. Holly from Massapequa. Holly, thank you for joining us this evening.
Hi, John. This is Holly from Massapequa. Thank you for taking my call again. I spoke to you last time.
Well, thank you for joining us again, Holly. It's good to have you.
Thank you. And I have to commend you for addressing heroin right out of the gate. That was one of my big concerns on the last call. And you very briefly touched on mental health treatment. I want to bring back to the table what's going to happen as far as treatment centers for our addicts. As
I
mentioned,
my
son's in Florida.
And you know what? Thank you, Holly, for raising that, because that's actually one of the 5 points of my plan that I discussed today. Because not only do I believe we need to be tougher on those that are selling drugs in our community, but we need to do more with respect to providing beds in our community. We need to be stronger on insurance companies who too often insist upon outpatient care as a first step prior to get inpatient care. And thanks to some work in the legislature this year, we've made progress on that. But we need to be diligent to make sure that insurance carriers are not forcing a type of treatment, namely outpatient treatment, on an addiction, which I think it's almost universally stated that the addiction is so powerful that inpatient treatment needs to be provided. And that means we need to provide more beds here in New York. We have a shortage of beds now and mental health facilities around the state. I would propose using money taken from criminal foreclosures and using that to provide for additional beds. We need for additional training on dealing with professionals who are dealing with this epidemic. So while we need to be tough on those that are selling this drug in our community, we also need to understand that we need to provide better education to our children and better mental health facilities for those that are suffering from the addiction. So thank you, Holly, for calling in. We have Meredy from Massapequa. Meredy?
Yes, hi.
Yes, hi, how are you?
Good, how are you?
I'm doing great, thank you. Thank you for calling.
Good. Well, I agree with everyone who wants additional beds for addicts and better rehabilitation. I also have a problem on the other end. My daughter was robbed by her next-door neighbor, and unfortunately, so were 31 other people by her next-door neighbor. 32 times he was arrested and always released.
But you know why he was released, Meredy? Because of the act that I was talking about before, the 2009 Drug Dealers Protection Act that was pushed by Eric Schneiderman and his colleagues in the New York State Senate back in 2009. Under that provision of law, it provided that addicts, even those that commit burglary, were eligible for release and treatment. Now, it's one thing to be an addict and suffering from an addiction. It's another thing when you're committing crimes on innocent people in the community. You need to be held accountable. You need to be taken off the streets. And the idea that we have this revolving door of justice from people that are stealing from our community and selling drugs and narcotics, to me, is outrageous. But that's the type of approach that this Attorney General takes to crime. He was the most soft-on-crime senator in the New York State Senate. I remember he voted against anti-terror legislation after the attacks on September 11. So we need to be tough on dealers. We need to help those that are addicted. But the idea that those that are selling drugs in our society face revolving door justice is absolutely deplorable.
I'm glad to hear you say that.
Well, thank you. Thank you for joining in. Edna from Middle Island. Edna?
Yes, Mr. Cahill.
How are you?
Thanks for taking my call. I'm very good, thank you. My husband and I were involved in a small business for over 50 years. We decided to get out of business, sell off everything because of this new law or this new invitation that the state has incurred to give tax abatements to people that are coming in from out of state to start businesses and would get a tax abatement for 10 years.
Yeah.
How does a small business compete against somebody down the block in a like business paying no taxes? How can we possibly compete? It's an unfathomable question.
Yeah, and I hear this issue all across the state in so many communities that are suffering and trying to keep their small businesses operating, and they see down the street next to a university, someone's opening up a shop and operating tax-free. It's one policy for one set of people and another set of policy for those that have been trying to make their communities better for decades. So, that is an issue with the legislature. But I will tell you this: when it comes to small business, we need an attorney general who's fair in protecting the interests of small business. I hear so often with respect to the overregulation and the unfairness that we have for small businesses, family operations. They face this obsessive regulatory structure in the state, an unfair tax system, as you just pointed out, and they need to have not only an advocate in Albany for small business, and I'm a small business owner myself. As I mentioned, I have a small business with about 12 or 13 employees, and it's a struggle in New York. And we need somebody who understands those concerns and protect the interests of small business and make sure that they can compete. Can I ask you all again to, if you have a question, please press 0. It's been great to have you on. I'd love to get to as many questions as possible. So if you have a question, please press 0. Laura Lee from Massapequa. Laura Lee, thank you for calling in.
Hi, how are you? Thank you for giving us such wonderful information. You've answered a lot of my questions. I did have a lot of concerns about the Common Core, but I also wanted to further ask questions related to that in regards to how do you feel that you are going to be able to make a change in the education system where right now it is so deeply ingrained with the Common Core curriculum, with the assessment process where our children are spending an hour to 2 hours on testing with the state tests, and the teachers are basically, their program is centered around getting these children prepared because their evaluations and their assessments are attached to the children's scores on these state tests. I want to know what your position is, and I want to know how you're going to make a difference. What changes are you going to implement on this?
Well, and thank you, Laura Lee, for calling in. Again, the issue of the Common Core and its implementation needs to be revisited in its entirety and come up with our own state standards, which, of course, should be developed by the New York State Board of Regents. And certainly as Attorney General, as an advocate for all New Yorkers, and particularly an advocate for the children of the state, remember, I believe that education is a civil right. And when our children's ability to get a quality education is being impaired by bureaucrats in Albany, the Attorney General, I believe, has an absolute obligation to stand up and fight for the rights of those children to get a quality education and not to be bogged down in teaching standards that are imposed from Washington. So I know I will be an effective advocate. There is limitations of what an Attorney General can do with respect to education policy in the state. He can be a voice of reason, a voice of the parents, and a voice of the children. And if somebody is interfering with the civil rights of our children to get a quality education, he can, of course, step in, and I will do exactly that. We've had an Attorney General who has been silent on the issue of education, as he has on so many issues. If you don't care about the issues about facing our children in our school, the future of our state, the future of our country, you really don't have a place, in my opinion, in public office. So I promise to be as effective as an advocate I can for the children in Albany. That's whether it's respect to, Common Core or education in general, and getting them a sound quality education. Thank you for calling. Mary from Seaford. Mary, thank you for joining us.
Yes, excuse me. I haven't heard anything regarding consumer protection, especially when it's involved with car dealers. I had a very serious situation, which I spoke to the Attorney General of my own county. Plus, the only way I was able to get some help is when I contacted the governor of New York. And finally, after years, I was able to get a little bit back of my money, which was a fraudulent. I proved fraud in my correspondence, and that's what I'm interested in. What are you going to do to protect the consumer, particularly against car dealers?
Mary, great question, because, for years the Attorney General's office was looked at the place in New York State where consumers could go and get fairness and get protection from scrupulous vendors, whether they be car dealerships or healthcare providers. And that seems to have fallen off the radar screen of the last several Attorney Generals. They're more interested in getting headlines, getting money out of Wall Street than they are in protecting the needs of consumers around the state. And I've heard the issue that you've raised in every area of the state. I hear it in poor immigrant communities that are being ripped off by vendors. I hear it from the elderly who are being ripped off by alleged health care providers, and I've certainly heard it with respect to auto dealerships where people are being ripped off by unscrupulous vendors of automobiles. We need to once again make consumer protection a priority in the Office of Attorney General. It has had a long history of really providing protection for consumers. It has totally disappeared, certainly under Eric Schneiderman. I would again resurrect the efforts of the Attorney General's office to protect consumers against unfraudulent practices. But I'm glad you raised that point, Mary, because that's a critical issue for the Attorney General's office of the state of New York, which he has utterly failed to fulfill. So remember, if you have a question, please press 0. Again, thank you all for joining us this evening. We have time for a couple more questions. We have Ed, I think from Mattatuck. Ed?
It's Mastic Beach. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you for joining us.
My question is regarding FiOS. I live in the Brookhaven, and obviously Verizon is picking and choosing who they feel like giving FiOS to. And between business purposes and my kids needing it for school, I'm wondering about forcing Verizon to treat everybody the same.
Well, a very good point, because, it has not, FiOS is not available everywhere in the state of New York, and particularly downstate, and it is a complicated issue with franchise rights for existing cable operators, et cetera. And I think it's also a question of how much capital that Verizon has basically able to expend on the capital costs associated with bringing FiOS to these neighborhoods. But I do believe that, back when I was working in the Governor Pataki's administration, we did break basically the monopoly of one cable provider for all of Westchester and all of Long Island, and competition has been proven to be beneficial to the consumer. So, and the Attorney General office has a very important role with respect to energy and utility services and the representation before the Public Service Commission, Ed. So as Attorney General's office, I would look to be active in the issue in competition and fairness with respect to cable operations, and making sure that operators like FiOS are reaching areas that need and deserve their services, that are entitled to a reasonable return, but people are also entitled to their service, because as you mentioned, it provides an important service, and it also provides competition. So great question, Ed.
Well, especially after receiving funds from the state of New York in the form of fees from Long Island for the past 70, 80 years, the phone companies do have a responsibility to their customers.
No question about it, and they have a requirement to reinvest in their communities. And the Attorney General's office, through the Public Service Commission, is supposed to ensure that the communities get that return on their investment, get the benefit of the, as you mentioned, the dollars that have the rate of return that's allowed for these telecommunication industries, whether it's FiOS, Cablevision, or AT&T. So there absolutely is an obligation to the local communities. We're out of time. I want to thank you all for joining us. If you didn't get to your question, you can stay on the line and leave a message, and I'll do my best to get back to you. It really was, again, a pleasure joining all you folks for the second Teletown Hall out here in Long Island. I hope you have found it nearly as informative as I have. So thank you all. Don't forget to go out there and vote. If I can, a little TV commercial before I end. Please make sure you follow me on Twitter, Cahill4AG, also on Facebook. And if we'd love to get some volunteers at friendsofcahill.com. That's friendsofcahill.com to spread the message of the campaign over the next 2.5 weeks. So thank you all for joining us. It's been a real pleasure. Bye-bye.